Assalamu alaikum. My name is Aysha Mercedes. I am a qualified counsellor, podcast host on a popular YouTube channel called Sister to Sister, and a television presenter on Islam channel. I am a revert to Islam. I'm of mixed heritage. My mum is half English and half Irish, and my dad was Jamaican. I've been Muslim for coming up to 13 years now. I grew up in London. So I was born in London. I was born in Leytonstone in East London, and I lived there for about 4 years. So my mum's family come from a Catholic background and my dad's family come from a Christian background. However, both my parents didn't really practice any religion in the household. I can remember being about 4 years old and my mum and dad split up. My dad unfortunately suffered with paranoid schizophrenia. It was very difficult. I can remember my mum saying to me that my dad, she got to a point where she was scared that my dad was going to kill her, and she literally would sleep with a knife under her pillow. So she had to make the decision to actually move from the house and escape from where my dad knew we were because she was terrified. We moved over from East London over to North London. We were there in North London for about 8 years. We came into contact with my dad again. I was seeing my dad for a period of time, and again, due to his mental health, he had another episode, and again, it became very dangerous for us to remain where we were. So we moved around again. The same thing happened when I got to 12 years old, but the incident that happened, I was having some difficulties at my school, and my mum told me not to tell my dad, and I did. And I can remember my dad's reaction was extremely scary. He became very angry and started shouting, and we left that night. We literally went home, packed up our bags and left and went to Essex. Essex was a very, very different area. It was predominantly white. I was the only mixed race person in the whole entire school. There was literally one other black person in the school, but it was just me. You know, this was my prime age. I was 12 or 13 years old by the time I started school, and I can remember feeling like completely the odd one out, and it was very difficult for me to fit in. I always felt really different. I felt very isolated, even within my own friendship groups, and I just didn't feel like I belonged. When I got to adult ages, as time went on, it became really difficult for me. I think due to the trauma of moving around so much, not really having a secure identity, and also just not having a strong foundation, I began to feel even more isolated and even suicidal at times. When I got to about 18 years old, I just found myself spiraling out of control. I was mixing with lots of different people that were not of a good influence to me, and I probably wasn't a good influence to them. It was almost like I gravitated towards those that came from broken homes, those that didn't have strong family ties, and I almost developed a family on the streets. This was inevitably sending me down a deep, dark road of destruction. As I got older and I got into my 20s, my friends changed, and I started to form new friendships with people. And I can remember one of my friends at the time, I was involved in music and so were they, and I'd never had a Muslim friend before. I didn't know anything about Islam, and I can remember that my friend at the time, this brother that was involved in music, he started telling me about Islam, and I kind of listened to him and I was intrigued, and I asked him to tell me more. He would compare Christianity with Islam, and he would explain to me that this is what Islam is. Islam is a true religion of one God, and every question that I asked about Islam, he would answer. And I found when I had visits to the church as a young person and I had been looking for answers, I was always shut down, and I was always challenged almost on the questions that I was asking. So what intrigued me about Islam and made me more inquisitive and more wanting to find out about this religion was that all of my questions that I asked were answered. I can remember when I'd asked so many questions and it just got to a point where I was considering taking my shahadah, considering becoming Muslim, but I didn't want to change my lifestyle. At that time, I was partying, I was on the party scene, I was very popular, and it was almost like my life revolved around my lifestyle and being a part of that scene. So I wasn't ready to give up that scene. I wasn't ready to change my life at that time. And so I kind of was putting off taking my shahadah for that reason. But all in a space of about a few months, my dad, we wasn't talking at the time because of his mental health, and I was staying away from him. And I got a phone call and somebody said to me, look, you need to go and visit your dad. You need to go down to his flat now. So I thought, something had happened. Maybe he'd been arrested again. And I went down to his flat and I saw police tape outside. So I assumed, he'd got himself into trouble because he was, involved in crime. And I just thought, here we go again. And what I remember happening is I tried to get in and I was stopped. They said, you can't come in here. And I said, why? And they said, they explained to me that my dad had been stabbed. So I was completely shocked and I managed to find out where he was. I went down to the hospital and he'd been stabbed 8 times. Now, you've got to imagine, I felt overwhelming feeling of sadness seeing my dad like that. I felt guilty that I wasn't there. I felt angry towards, the fact that he'd been attacked. My dad was difficult, but he had severe mental health, and I was really sad when I heard that. When I went back home that night after I'd visited my dad in hospital, I remember picking up a Quran and trying to read it. And I can remember someone's voice in my head that I'd been speaking to about the religion saying, Allah is able to do all things. So I picked up the Quran and I tried to read it, and I made a prayer to Allah and I said, Ya Allah, take the pain away. And I can remember feeling this warm feeling going all the way into my feet, all the way up my legs, all the way in my body. And I felt this elevation of my heart. I really just felt like my heart lift. And it sounds strange. How do you feel your heart lift? But that's the way that I can describe it, that it just felt like something changed for me that day, and I just felt relief. After that, I was really eager to take my shahadah. I was really adamant that I'd had that feeling, and I really believed that Allah answered my prayers that day. I went into the masjid with my friend and I took my shahadah, and it was amazing. It felt like the angels were around me. I felt light, I felt happiness. The challenge that I faced when I first became Muslim is that I feel like I rushed too much into everything. I was extremely passionate, I was extremely zealous. I felt deeply connected. When I used to pray, I used to cry every single time. I would literally be in tears throughout the whole of my prayer. And the problem was when that feeling started to wear away, when your faith goes up and goes down. And I kind of didn't anticipate it going down. I didn't anticipate feeling different as my faith level increased and decreased. So the challenge that I faced was when my iman, my faith did go down, because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to deal with that feeling. I didn't understand that feeling. I feel like I needed to have taken a bit of time, maybe be told by somebody that, look, take your time, take one day at a time, take one step at a time. You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to change your whole life. That the Prophet ﷺ, we know that he was spreading the message of Tawheed for over 13 years, and that was just building on developing the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the other challenge I felt was wearing the hijab and covering up. It was very, very difficult for me to be so used to wearing tight clothing and wearing what I want and having my hair out. Living in a predominantly white area and being in areas where I was often the odd Muslim was very difficult, because I felt that people were looking at me and I felt I was the odd one out again. And I had those feelings growing up when I was younger. I always felt like the odd one out. It was a struggle for many, many years, and I just think that sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be the perfect Muslim, we strive for perfection when we should just be strive to improve ourselves each day. It's not easy changing your whole life, becoming a whole completely different person. Being a non-Muslim, especially if you didn't know much about the religion, especially if you hadn't implemented anything before you started practicing, it's a very big step. And I just think that having a level of compassion and understanding towards one another could be a really, really good help. When it comes to the community, I think that we all need to do more individually and as a community to welcome those that come into the religion. It can be a difficult time. What you have to remember is when somebody becomes Muslim, not only are they striving towards a new life, but they're also leaving a big part of their old life behind. This transition can be extremely difficult. Having the support of other Muslim women in your local area or in your wider community makes a really, really big difference, and it can offer so much support. Imagine being pretty much alone for Ramadan, for Eid, and not having anybody to share that with, and then being welcomed into a community, being invited for iftar, being invited for Eid, being welcomed into a family. Even though it is still difficult, it can really take off that burden of difficulty that a new revert or even a revert of many years can face. Solace is one of the only Muslim charities specifically geared towards revert Muslim women. I've recommended sisters to go to Solace for financial support, for emotional support, for support with guidance to do with housing. One thing you have to understand about revert sisters is it can be quite complicated, especially if you're just coming into the religion. There's lots of things that are changing. You may need support, you have issues with the family sometimes, and it can be quite different. So I just think it's imperative that we have Solace as a charity and we keep supporting the charity, because a revert Muslim woman, she needs emotional support. She needs somebody to listen to her. She needs guidance. Even when it comes to learning the religion, sometimes you feel so isolated, you just don't know where to go. And I think that Solace really is a bridge for that gap.